from the vault, high atop the pastoral center of the Diocese of Camden, you're listening to Talking Catholic.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Talking Catholic, the official podcast of the Diocese of Camden, where we explore the inspiring work and faith-filled initiatives shaping our Catholic community in South Jersey. I'm here with my co-hosts, Mike, Bress, or Greg. How are you?
I'm good. I'd like to know how that intro came about. That's the first time I'm hearing that. Is that you generated or generated from a friend?
Somehow I have a friend.
Okay.
So
is his first name Chat and his last name GPT?
That's the last name.
Yeah. Okay.
You're good. So for you guys out there, if you don't know about artificial intelligence, we have been talking a lot about this recently. So you're gonna hear some good stuff.
A lot of great intros and write-ups for the website that are based solely on that. Well, Marianela, it's nice to be with you again. It's been a little while, as Mike and Jen have said on the podcast recently, the mix-up of schedules and the craziness of everybody's duties within the diocese has created some lull for you and I being together, at least on this podcast. From a work perspective, work together every day, but
I'm missing it.
I know. So we're excited to be here. What in your world, for the folks at home, what in your world's been going on in these last few weeks since we've talked to them?
Well, a lot of, working with data, in my role as enrollment director for the diocese. So we have our national our National Catholic Education Association report this year for enrollment. It's done, so that's good. I'm celebrating that. And, Halloween just passed, so the kids dress up. It was fun on a personal level. How about you?
Yeah, not so much on the data level. I think I leave that to smarter folks. I tend to be the one to run around. My ADHD allows me to run around a bit and see what the wonderful things our schools are doing. So I've been able to go to a lot of events, especially in the fall, which has been exciting. And, personally enjoying Halloween. I feel like in the last years of the trick-or-treating from the kids' perspective with a 12 and 11-year-old at home, the costumes are getting less and less intricate and more football jersey and werewolf mask and go get some candy. But it's fun. This is the first year that they went by themselves. So we got to stay at home. Yeah, that was... we have a wonderful neighborhood, very safe, and they know the streets and houses that they can go to. And we also, funny enough, have one of those sort of like things for their phones that watches them kind of where they go. And so we put that in the one bag.
And they feel free.
And they feel free, but we're watching every block that they're on a street view map.
That's a parenting tip right there for those listening.
Yes, it was. But that was, it was exciting for them to have a little bit of freedom. It was exciting for us to not lose 3 bags of candy in 20 seconds with a sign that says take one, and the kids think it's take one bowl. So we were able to last most of the night with that. And just everything else. We're heading into a busy time period, for you and I in terms of enrollment season really kicking off and re-enrollment time and kind of getting ads out there and, new marketing materials. We've got the Discover Catholic Schools Week through the NCEA coming up in 2 weeks. So that's going to be an exciting time to profile our schools. And then it's Advent and Christmas and all the wonderful stuff, it just starts cascading from there.
I feel like we almost just finished counting the numbers, and we're kind of re-enrolling again and recounting and kind of keep the loop going.
It doesn't take long for us to celebrate before we're right back at it.
Exactly.
But what do we got on tap today for us?
So today this is a Catholic schools related podcast, and this is why we are here. And not only is it it's going to be a heavy, I would say, or heavily educational podcast today, because we have 2 experts in the field joining us today. The Diocese of Camden and our Office of Catholic Education has been doing a lot recently to make sure that we continue to strive when it comes to academic excellence. And that's one of our pillars, and we want to make sure that our kids know Jesus and develop a relationship with him. And Jesus was the big master, and so we want to continue with that trend. And so part of it is continuing to be schools that prepare our students for the future and make them good readers. So one of the things that we're going to be discussing today is the science of reading and how our office is training our teachers on how to do that better and how to make sure our kids are learning to read and doing it well. So for that, we have the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Assessment, Dr. Robert Lockwood, who's here with us. And we also have Dr. Sarah Kerins, who is the Assistant Superintendent for Student Services and Government Programs for the Diocese of Camden. So welcome both back to the show.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
That was a mouthful.
Yeah, I know. Titles are for us, right?
Thanks, Marianela.
Sure. And so why don't we start with Bobby, who, has been kind of like leading this initiative for us here in the diocese and doing a lot of research and work around providing these kinds of professional development for our teachers. Why do we go there this year?
Could you say it again?
Why did we go there this year?
Why did we have this talk about science of reading this year?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'd say it all started with, to your point, when you started off the podcast about data collection. And we've been doing that a little bit more intentionally over the past several years. I've been with the diocese almost 5 years now. And I came in the midst of COVID, which was fun within itself, of course. But we have been working on a standardized assessment and expanding that K to 12, that all of our students take this assessment. And as we've been looking at the results over time, we just started to notice more and more trends that students are having difficulty with literacy and reading overall. And they start out fairly strong when they're learning to read in K1 and 2. And then as they start to get older, it just slowly decreases. And we've looked into why that is. And it really is, you could link it back to social media and technology and a host of other things, but we started to recognize this was not a result of COVID. We still have kids who have issues with reading and an interest in reading. And I say this all the time, if you can't read, you can't do much else. And so that's just the importance of making sure that, not only to your point, Marianela, that we're here to bring Jesus to students, but also to provide them with an education. And we have to be able to do the best that we can and provide as many resources to our schools as possible to make that happen. So that's where it started for us, and really talking about, okay, we know we have a problem now. We know this is an issue. We've talked about it with our schools, with our teachers, with the principals and the other administrators. Now what do we do about it? And so we've slowly been embarking upon some professional development series for the principals and for the teachers over the past few years, which incorporate an acknowledgement of this issue, which is a national issue. I want to say this is not specific to the Diocese of Camden. You look at any school or school district in the United States, and they're talking about this. And so there's been a heavy, just more conversations and discussions about the science of reading, although it's been around for a very long time, but you hear it more and more in the media the past few years. And so we've looked into different options and possibilities for our schools, and we do believe that we do better together. And so we've been gathering the schools more frequently, the teachers, and providing speakers and conversations about, what the issue is and then how to help address it ultimately. And thank goodness Sarah has come on board in the past year, and she was a primary grade teacher at one point, correct?
Middle school.
Oh, you were middle school. I'm sorry. But she has a better understanding of some of the primary grade, because she was she was an elementary school principal. I was high school. And the more and more that I have a 5-year-old, as you all know, and he's in the process of learning to read. And as a high school person and mostly secondary education, for me, it was always, they just come and they know how to read, and I don't have to worry about any of that.
There's magic.
It really is magical to watch a kid learn how to read, but not only magical and elusive to me at points, but the the amount of work that a teacher does to help a kid to read is just, as I've seen it and understood it more and gone to conferences and learned, it's just like overwhelming. And I don't know how they do it, but they do. And so luckily Sarah has come along and able to help move this process forward. So I'm happy to have her here and working as a partner for this and for our schools.
Yeah.
So Sarah, how do you see, how do you, how are you helping, the schools and the teachers understand this process? What's been your involvement?
That's a great question. So we're just getting, started really on, Bobby asked a great question, what do we do next? And so we've done some high level professional development, and now it's starting to get more granular. And so part of what I've been doing or will be doing very shortly is going around to speak to school faculties about how do you meet the needs of all students when you've got 20 to 25 kids in a classroom. And, some really fundamental things I think we should back up and talk about really is that reading is not a natural process scientifically, and it's something that needs to be explicitly taught. And a lot of the focus around science of reading has been around phonics instruction. And I do want to be very clear, Catholic schools never let go of that. They have always taught explicitly phonics. I went to public school, and I can remember my cousin, who is a year younger than me, we were doing homework together at one point, and he had a phonics book. And I said to him, what's that? Now, we were being taught phonics, but it was more from what we call a whole language approach. And he was learning it very explicitly. And Catholic schools have always, they know that they knew and continue to know that is what works and have done that. And that's why foundationally at the K-2 levels, we're stronger. Now, once the kids get older, then we're seeing scores start to drop off. And why is that? And as Bobby alluded to, it is a lot of the kids are not reading as much because they're on video, a lot of YouTube, a lot of social media, short form videos. So not a lot of endurance. And but one of the key takeaways from our PD sessions recently for me that really hit home, I think, was the importance of background knowledge, and not just, some districts have gotten diminished their science and social studies instruction at the expense of teaching reading. And really that's backwards, because that content knowledge and vocabulary that comes with that instruction is part of what helps the students be able to access those more complex texts. So then, to circle back to what we started out with and what I'm doing, now I've got to help faculties figure out how to accomplish that in a 60 to 90 minute reading block. How do we reach all kids and get where they are, and use the data that comes from our scores to teach smaller groups of kids how to read and close the gaps, close their deficiencies, their individual deficiencies. So that's what I'm working on.
And we're fortunate. One of the things that I was able to do when I got here, and as we had instituted this, we call it the STAR test for kids in K-12, I would go to schools individually and I would say, all right, you took the test. Now here's how you interpret the results and look at the results and talk about them, and some best practices around that. And that took a long time to go to 30 schools. And because
But you did it.
I did, but I thought it was important to do it individually. Just as, all of us try to go to schools individually, it's much easier to have conversations with a small group than it is with a large group. And so I did that for a while, and then Sarah came on board, and now she's been going and doing more of okay, now what? That you've got these scores and you can see what's going on in your classrooms. What do you do with it? And it's fortunate for us that we're also in the middle of an accreditation process for all of our schools collectively, and we're working on building a lot of the putting together goals that will help us utilize the resources that we have, both human and financial, and to better leverage those resources to provide services to teachers and then therefore students. So it's an exciting time for us. We've got a lot going on right now, but it will, in the next few years, I can just see it paying dividends to both teachers and kids and seeing the needle move.
Yeah. And I'm going to take it even a step back further, and I guess sort of a twofold question on it, because I will say personally, when I was in Catholic grade school, I had early on issues with reading comprehension. So the test came out and said it can read, but are you answering the questions? Are you getting what that is? So
Right.
the first question is, I guess, is that a part of this science of reading, not just the phonics part, but also, okay, the kid can read, but is he getting the material? And then is it, that's a difference of 30 years ago.
Right.
And now have you seen these differences? You mentioned social media. I mean, 30 years ago, it was test taking. It was, just building on those skills. So is there still that as a factor? Because I can tell you now, I'm an avid reader. And, and so it never, the love was there, but was it what I was actually getting? So I guess is it, first, is reading comprehension a part of that? And then second, are there still some things from those times ago that come up, or is technology and some of the things we're already talking about really the pinpoint stuff? Or is it a mixed bag of all of that?
Yeah, I'd say the mixed bag, honestly, because you have this generation of learners who, and I think I was in this group, probably not knowingly, of the whole language learner. I mean, when I was growing up and older, getting older, it was the reading wars, we called it. And some people probably remember this, and some don't, but it was whole language versus phonics. And, there was the, commercials for Hooked on Phonics, for example, that some of us probably remember. And there was no real, I mean, I can tell you that concretely in some schools, teachers were left to decide on their own. And so you could have, let's say there were, three sections of first grade, and one teacher decided they were doing whole language instruction for reading, and then the others were more focusing on phonics. Mm-hmm. And so that approach is very different in teaching kids. And so what it comes down to is, you were asking about reading comprehension. I mean, it's the formula of the simple view is decoding, and really understanding the words and the sounds and such, and then language comprehension and understanding the word and, meaning sometimes behind it is your reading comprehension, to understand, to your point, what you're reading. Yeah. And so if you're missing either two of those components, then kids have difficulties. And to your point, as you get older, it's like you might have one but not the other, and so then you have some struggles. And with the whole language approach, that wasn't necessarily the model. It was more of a I say word recognition. Like, you could see something and you knew that's what it was, but then that didn't always lead to comprehension and understanding. So there is a science behind it, I mean, for lack of a better word. And so couple that with the complexities of teaching kids some of those components and the proper resources behind it, with kids have cell phones in their hands. They've got, they have difficulties with, to Sarah's point earlier, they can really short verses of things, but, they're
endurance,
exactly. To read long passages is not great.
A graphic novel versus like an actual book,
right? But no, and that's another component of it is informational text. I mean, if we were to give a kid like fiction to read, they're sure, they find it interesting, they'll read it. But if you give them a biology textbook that, especially as they get older into the middle and high school years, that they have to understand and kind of memorize and look at some of those texts that they might find, dare I say, boring. I mean, we had a fascinating presentation by Dr. Gene Kerins, who is a chief academic officer for Renaissance, and he was talking about the research saying that if kids don't understand 2% of words in a passage, they give up on it. Like 2% is not a lot. Like if you don't recognize some words, like you've lost them. Yeah. And then it's like, okay.
That's incredible.
Yeah. It's just, it's a really low threshold that we have overall for challenging our brains when it comes to reading. And so if we're not giving and have proper resources and understanding of that process with ourselves, with our teachers, with our families, with our kids, then we're unfortunately creating a generation of students that they're going to be like they are now, and they're not going to read, and they're going to continue to be on their phones and social media, and we've just perpetuated a problem. So, I could talk about this forever, as you might imagine, because it's a serious issue in the U.S. I would say, perhaps the world, but. It's something that we need to really focus on.
Well, you see it every day. I mean, and again, my two kids in in our Catholic schools, and I've got one who, I mean, they're both readers, but it's interesting watching the progression, right? And as you're talking about, of one can read texts that they're interested in, and the other is more that kind of less endurance, right? And it's just fascinating. They're being educated in the same school, but maybe in different styles, to your point, and personalities are a little bit different. But I also want, and I think you mentioned it with the biology textbook, but going back to taking away other time, other subject time to try to tackle this can also be a detriment, right? To your point, Sarah, because if you're a fan of science or history, but that's gone so that you can learn how to read, do you learn the love for the reading, right? Because now, or the subject matter that you might have been able
But I think,
to do.
Mike, as we were kind of like, present at this presentation with Dr. Kerins, like he alluded to the fact that, you can do kind of like both at the same time. And I want any one of you both to talk about what's innovative about this idea of the science of reading, because we know that our teachers, like we have great teachers in our Catholic schools, they have been, some of them have been educated a while ago, and others are newer. What can you tell us about the innovative aspect of being proactive on this topic of the science of reading, and what's that going to bring kind of like different to our schools?
I don't know about innovative, simply because I think we're just circling back to what we know has always worked, and maybe some enhancements along with the brain research that's, more modern. But I think there's a great opportunity to really embed our Catholic identity if we're getting more kids to read more literature. Because one thing I think sometimes gets missed as we open up our basal reader, whether you're reading Journeys or Wonders or whatever you're reading textbook series, is we're not always talking about the virtues. What are the characters doing, and what are the virtues, and are they making decisions that are in accordance with their faith? And that's really what we're going to bring to it, And then in terms of the nonfiction, the history and the science, that vocabulary is so important. It's just going to enrich the students' vocabulary and understanding of the world. So when they're learning science, social studies, history, they're expanding their understanding of the world. And that's just going to be really critical for them to be able to understand text, no matter what form that text is in.
Sure.
Yeah, and we had... So we double down, as I say, on ELA time at schools for the most part. I mean, it's the longest period we have particularly at the elementary schools. And one of the things that Dr. Kerins shared with us, which we could see, I just don't know if we've always acknowledged it, is that we've been doubling down on reading in class for decades, but it hasn't really. Things have gotten worse. They haven't gotten better. And so, to Sarah's point earlier about building background knowledge, he really illustrated to us the importance of not taking away from the science and social studies times, and even, dare I say, religion class at those grades. And in order to spend more time with reading, because they need to read those other topics in order to become excited about it. But also it reinforces what they've learned in the reading classes. And so we really are having conversations and reviewing how much time we do spend and allot for those subjects in our recommended schedule. But we had teachers who at the meeting in the post-conferences during their discussions said, I did not realize how detrimental it was for me to say we're not doing social studies today because we're going to spend more time on reading. Wow. And I think they felt a little guilty about it, having heard that. And it's not speaking ill of them in any way. I think they just didn't understand, the importance of being more holistic in our approach ultimately. And so that's something that we really need to spend some more time on. And as part of I go back to our accreditation process and our building plans, and it's like, okay, this isn't working the way we thought it was. And so what is the best practice moving forward, and how can we build that comprehensively together?
And can you give a little more background on bringing in Dr. Kerins and his role? Because I know we know his his work because we were there, but talking about what he does, what he did, and going even back to the beginnings when he was talking, with just the principals. There's sort of a linear plan that you had even for that. So
we so as our partner, Renaissance, and utilizing the STAR assessment, Gene Kerins has been with them for I think 20 years now as their chief academic officer. And Gene and I ran in the same circles, although we didn't know it. I'm originally from Delaware. He was in Delaware. We kind of, we knew the same people, but we had never actually met. And so that kind of connected us when I came here and I started talking to him based on his role at the Renaissance Company. And I said, Gene, we're having this issue. What do you think? And so he's spends most of his time doing the research, looking at all of these, these topics, because that's his job. And he said, yeah, you want me to come and talk to people about it? And I said, that would be fantastic. And so we brought him first to see the principals, and that was a few years ago. And we started to recognize, again, looking at the data, that we did have issues, and that we needed to have a little bit of better understanding of it. And so Gene came and talked to the principals, and they were just enamored with him more than any presentation I've seen them hear from.
Right.
And so they were like, he has to speak to all of our teachers. Like we were in the middle. He hadn't finished, but not for 2 minutes, and they were walking out the door. And I think every one of them stopped me and said, he's got to come, right? He's coming to the next PD session for the teachers. And I was like, yes, we can make that happen. Sure.
Calm down.
And so he did, and he came and he did a session with them last spring for the first time with the K-8 teachers, P-K-8 teachers. And he gave a broad overview of just like, here's, some of the stuff that I was talking about a little bit earlier, and kind of gave an overview, and just shared, like, here's the best practices now. And then these are some things you need to think about. Everything from what book series you're using and resources to, as I mentioned earlier, how much time you're spending on this topic in your classroom. And then we had him again for a part 2, talking a little bit more about background knowledge, this past October, so it was about almost a month ago that he was here. And then he also presented, we had conversations, because this is a problem at the high school level as well. And so we had the high school principals decide that they wanted him to come and talk to them. And I will say the same thing. The high school teachers, I was a high school teacher for most of my career. I say we're a tough crowd, and they gave him glowing remarks, more than I have seen from any presenter that we've had. And so, like, they just loved what he had to say, because Gene was also a high school English teacher, so he knew how to speak to them. And one of the things that he says is that it doesn't matter what content area you are. Everybody has the responsibility to help a kid read. And so, like, that resonated with a lot of folks. And we had a few English teachers, high school English teachers, that came up afterward, and they said, I feel like I've been heard finally, on all the things that I've been saying over the years. And so it was just a great opportunity to be together and share in the common goal, because teachers, we get into this for one reason. We want to work with kids and want to help kids and educate them. And sometimes, that gets lost, based on all the other things that we have going on. But they were really excited about this. And so we're excited to continue the conversation and building that out. And Sarah and I have already talked about, like, the what's next. And for us, it's to differentiate and delineate a little bit more for each group now. Okay, we've got the early childhood group. They need some specific things. You've got the primary grade teachers. Maybe they've talked about wanting to do a little bit more on vocab and decoding, the phonics piece, and then the secondary folks, the middle and high school, trying to determine what their needs will be, and working with kids that we recognize. And it's as Sarah said, okay, now what? Like, we know these things, but what are the best practices to help them in the classroom?
And I think it's so important to kind of like say, like, the commitment of the diocese, and also like the Office of Catholic Education, to continue to improve our schools. And sometimes people say, what do those people do out there?
Sure.
And this is the kind of work that goes in our office, kind of like thinking of the strategies to make sure that we accomplish our goals and also follow the mission. I want to ask you about the role of parents in this in this initiative of making sure our kids not only know how to read, but are able to comprehend and do it well and perform at the level that they need to perform. How can parents engage and be part of this as well?
Yeah, I'll preface by saying when the superintendent, Bill Watson, brought me on, one of the things that we had talked about was the importance of a comprehensive and unified PD strategy moving forward with teachers and families overall. And this was before my time, and Bill said we were notorious for picking a topic and having a single PD on it, and then we never had any other conversations about it. And so it was just these opportunities to get together and, this sounds like a great topic, let's talk about it. And then that was the end of it. And so I think both Sarah and I have similar feelings on this, having been in the administrators for a long time. Those were not always the most useful PDs when we were in the building. And some great idea that the Office of Catholic Education had that then it went nowhere. And so I really take that to heart in this work and trying to support our teachers and our schools in let's be a little bit more proactive with putting this together and not do the just one-offs. And so that circles us back to parents, and something to consider is how we incorporate them more into the process of educating kids, because schools have to be everything to everybody these days, and that is not an easy task. And I think it's particularly challenging for Catholic schools because of our resources and the availability of resources. But don't get me wrong, we try to do it anyway. But the importance of incorporating parents more into this, I think we'll see a lot more of that. And this is an aside, but we're seeing that with religious education as well, and the work that Lee Delmonte is doing for the parish side, and it's trying to say the traditional way isn't working as well for faith formation, for example, which we also see for our Catholic schools. Let's re-envision what this looks like overall. For reading specifically as it relates to parents, I've been reading a lot of books lately, and hands down they say if you don't have your parents on board and they're not working with you as a partner in this, and helping for kids in reading specifically, then your work is a whole lot harder as a school. And so, we have opportunities through our accreditation process. I keep linking ourselves back to that because I think that helps hold us more accountable and set some real goals. But to ask them how we can support them at home more explicitly than maybe we have in the past overall. Sarah might have additional ideas behind this, having been more recent in an elementary school, but I think we have opportunities to bring our parents in and having them be more aware of what's happening, and when possible, incorporating them more into some of our plans.
I totally agree. And I have 2 kids, and the one started reading when he was 3, and he cracked the code by himself. And I have, my younger daughter's is not cracking the code by herself. She needs explicit instruction to learn letters and sounds. And so I often think, I would like to do more with her, but I am a full-time working mom, and my husband also a full-time job. And I think that's the reality for most families these days. So it's when do you find the time? Yeah. And also, I'm an educator. I know what I'm doing. I can throw things together really quickly. Not everybody has that background or expertise. And so I think we have to really rethink homework, and and be more intentional about what is actually useful practice, and what is just exercises taking up time, that isn't necessarily useful. So I think if we start to engage in conversations around homework time and what that looks like and what kids can be doing, just the things I do with if you have young kids, the things I do with my daughter are multi-sensory is what we refer to it as, whereas I'll get textured paper or use shaving cream or things that have texture and have her trace letters in the texture. That's using all her senses to learn letters. So things like that. That's very intentional practice. That's helpful. my daughter was singing a song about the sound that E makes this week to the farmer in the dell. And so that is most certainly stuck in my head. Yeah. we are doing a tell and show. They have to give 3 clues. She's in preschool, so she has to give 3 clues for a thing that starts with E, and then she has to hide it in a bag and then whip it out for her friends and, say, this is what starts with E. So those are some of the things we're doing with the littlest. But yeah, I think really comes down to rethinking a homework strategy.
And even at the primary grade levels, I think the one thing that is, it sounds simple, but it doesn't happen, to Sarah's point, like working families, is read with your kid 15 minutes a day.
I was just
like, that's the thing that we miss.
And show examples, right?
Right.
Like I honestly think half of the reason that the kids do it, especially because they're 2 boys and they look to me as the father, is they see me reading, right? And so there's a gained interest a little bit there, but it's also setting. I was, when you were talking about like the different things and taking away from technology piece, says the guy that does the social media for the Catholic Schools office, but there's times where the TV is off, the phones are away, and you're almost given nothing else but to read. And it's 15 minutes, 30 minutes, and we're all doing it. We're all finding something, and we're providing that example. But I also think on the outside, seeing other programs and partnering, I know like locally, I think there's like, for the Philadelphia Phillies, they do like a fanatic about reading, right? And there's things like, how do you implement that? And is there, all that working well? But it got my younger one to read, right? Because at the end of the day, if he does it and they do it well, we're signing off on it. He gets a ticket to the Phillies game, right? And okay, so it's a cheesy way to do it, but it got him started, right? Somewhat. So it's
kind of like finding something that they really like and kind of like going with it. My oldest one would say, I don't love reading, but she would read all the books that you would give her on like the old diaries, and she's like, I'm reading that one and I read it in 30 minutes, Mom, and kind of like liking that, as opposed to my son who would really dive into any book. Like he really likes reading. So it's finding something that they like, I think really helps, and trying to get those 15 minutes of the day at nighttime, if that's when it works for you. But it doesn't have to be at nighttime. Just kind of like remember that as well. Having books in some parts of the house that they can grab, and limiting screen time, I think.
Well,
is
and
huge.
I would say for our older kids, that's the key concept there, because we had just a couple of weeks ago, a presenter come in for the principals, K-12, PK-12, and talked about the dangers and the challenges of social media and technology with kids today. And I mean, it was very in a lens of Catholic identity, and being a Catholic. And so like, it was a fantastic presentation, but it really illustrated, I think, the importance of put down the phone. I mean, at the basic level for the kids.
Right.
And so the more we can educate parents in that regard as well, I think the more then it reinforces the importance that you're talking about of reading and, taking those opportunities instead of just being on your phone the whole time. And and allowing kids to do that. So we just want to, again, I think education is the key for everybody. It's not, for our teachers, for our families, for all of us. And the more we know, the better. And so this is, I think, another one of those avenues where we can help educate parents.
Yeah.
And it can be really comforting, Mike. I mean, just think about your children and having that opportunity to sit down or lay down in bed with them, like reading. It's emotionally good for them as well, and it's, making them smarter for sure.
Yeah. I mean, we laugh and going into the social media aspect of, like, we used to record everything, right, and post it online, and it was like when they were young and it sort of stopped at a certain period. But we have videos of them reading, and learning that. And that's such like my wife's a teacher. And so there's some validation. She's got some skill sets that I'm like, don't forget, he's also just your child. You don't need to give him an A every time he gets a bath, But yeah, that's the question I was going to ask both of you. And it doesn't have to be in our diocese maybe, but in your time in this reading, have you seen success stories, places where, is it with a teaching group or with talking, maybe it was the just hearing the response from the teachers that they want to do this, but were there any places where you saw, okay, we started to work on some version of this and we were seeing incremental growth or success in it.
Yeah, I mean, I can say we're in the early stages in our system. I was at a conference last month about the science of reading. It was called the Reading League, and there were 2,500 people there wanting to learn more about how to teach kids to read. And they're fairly young. They've only been around for about 10 years. But I got to go to a great presentation that was a school that was similar demographics to ours. They were similar size. They were PK to 8 and about 350 kids. So that's pretty close to some of our schools. And they were able to just kind of go through the progression of where they started with this whole process and where they are now. And it was a 5-year process, and they're just starting to see returns on that now. Okay. So it's really we're in it for the long haul, essentially. And there's a lot of infrastructural changes, I think, that we need to look at and potentially adjust for the future so that we can see gains with the kids.
Can you talk a little bit more about the conference experience? I know you came back kind of like saying and being so excited about your participation there and what you saw. Any sessions in particular that you may want to talk about that, really excited you?
Yeah, there were a couple. The one thing is I love the way that they set up the conference in that it's folks from districts, leaders, school leaders, teachers, PK to 12. And they said, if you're in this category, then this is the ones you should go to. And they kind of gave you a list. And so it was great to have recommendations that way, because I have said this a bunch of times. I know nothing about the science of reading, and how to teach a kid to read. I didn't. And so I really felt like it was important to educate myself, in this process. Because again, high school person, they came to me and they were fine. I was like, okay, those folks did their work great. Thank you. And then I don't even think I said thank you. It was just like assumption that they're going to come to me and know how to read. And that's not the case anymore. And so seeing how this is implemented, then the conversations that are had are both at a state level, nationally, for school districts and dioceses and how they operate, down to individual schools, to individual teachers and what's happening in the classroom. And it's all synergistic in how it's, put together and is supposed to happen. So I appreciated the way that they created those opportunities for different groups to kind of envision this and what it's supposed to look like. And one of the other great ones presentations that I went to was just about resources. Look, science of reading is a buzzword these days. I mean, you go to any, read anything related to this topic, and you're going to see the science of reading in there. And the unfortunate thing is any company can come out and say, we're based on the science of reading. Are you really? Who says who? So, they can say anything they want. And so it was really about taking stock of your resources that you're using. And I'll be very specific. What textbook series are you using? Is it working? Yes or no? And how do you make those determinations? And what is an unbiased source that will help you determine what the best resources are out there? Because vendors want to sell you their products, plain and simple. And so it's really finding what the best products are for our teachers and for our students. I had to laugh because it was called, is it science or is it snake oil? That was the presentation. And I was like, oh, this is going to be fun.
I like this. Yeah.
So, and they kind of start off with, there are no vendors in the room, right?
Yeah.
So, but it was that what I found really helpful, because I think that's a part of where this starts, is looking for what are the best practices and how do we find them, and what's going to give us the best evaluation of those resources overall that we should be using. So I found that very useful.
That's great. And going back to the fact that, principals need to determine, right, what book series they use. And we help them with the curriculum, which is already developed, and it's a diocesan curriculum, which also follows New Jersey standards. How do we support them in getting to the books they need and making sure that we get them to what did you say, the snail, not to the snail,
science or snake oil,
exactly. So not the second one but the right one.
Yeah.
How do we support them in that, Bobby? From our office, I would say would be the question.
Well, that's what we're doing now. We had created a couple of years ago, I created I guess I called it an approved or recommended textbook list and gave a little summary of each text series and all the subject areas, and kind of said, here's your options, decide what you need locally. And what we've learned is, just getting through all the data and these conversations, is that they don't know what to pick. And so they'll pick something based on what someone else is using, and maybe it works for that community, maybe it doesn't. And there could be a variety of needs at that school that fit one school but not another. And then going back to what I said earlier, is it actually a useful and accurate, efficient product to be using,
Right.
resource for the group of kids that you have? And maybe that answer is no. So that's what we're doing now, is really kind of vetting some of those a little bit more intentionally and saying, you've been using this for a long time. I love that you're using this for a long time, but I'm not sure it's really making the difference that you want it to make. And we've had teachers who have said that too. They have said, we would like commonalities among the curriculum resources that are chosen, because then we can talk about it with each other and what are the best practices versus you use this one and I use that one. And sometimes in the same school, they're using different things. And it's not that don't get me wrong, we're not disorganized with it. We've allowed a lot of choice over the years, which I believe in the choice. I also recognize that that's gotten us into a little bit of trouble, unfortunately. And so now we have the opportunity to mainstream some of this and say, here's 3 great options. Pick which one you think is going to be best for your school.
Beautiful.
These ones probably aren't going to do what you want them to do or what you thought they were doing. And we have data to be able to back that up, not just with our kids' results, but some of the stuff that I learned at the conference and in offering some evaluations of those resources.
That's amazing. And just kind of like wanted to talk to Sarah a little bit, because she's, working with student services and very connected with the New Jersey Catholic Conference, also with the advisory board, working with George Corwell. And just wanted to ask you about the students that have special needs and the time that they get like as an additional support, and how that's kind of like merging with this vision that we have for the diocese.
Yeah, that's a great question. So in New Jersey, we are lucky to have some state funding in Act 192, 193 to support students who are below a certain threshold in their standardized tests. And so, the time is helpful. It's never enough. And then students who fall into one of the 13 disability categories might have something called an ISP, and they will get special support services as part of that plan. In addition to the 192, 193 services, they might be getting accommodations or modifications to their curriculum, depending on where they are and what their needs are. And so we're fortunate to have that in New Jersey, and that our non-public students in Catholic schools are still afforded those services. So, but then we need to, as a Catholic community, take that a step further. We're called to meet the needs of all kids the best that we can with the resources we have. And sometimes that's just making some small changes to our overall approach to instruction, being able to modify and adapt things for kids who have needs. And I think we're starting to see some more success in that area, and that's a lot of the presentations I'll be doing to faculties in the coming months. So hopefully we start to make strides.
I think there's also a misnomer that we're a Catholic school system, so we don't have any kids with issues. Like we don't have any kids
magic kids, I always
right,
say.
they're magical, right? I love it. They just learn how to do this, and it's easy. We follow the same trends as everyone else. We're 17, 18, 19% of our kids have some kind of individual service plan where they have some special need for learning. And we have to provide those services to the kids as much as we can. Even more so because those, like if you look at our data, those are the kids who are struggling even more to read than our other students. And so we have to have more services available for them.
So, can you speak about I think traditionally a lot of people discard inquiring in a Catholic school because their child may have an ISP, individual service plan. And so for our listeners out there that may know somebody, or maybe they have a child who has special needs, how do we go about finding out, if whether or not our school can service those students?
Yeah, I mean, it typically starts. Sarah does a lot of work with the schools on this, but it typically starts with just a review of what their documentation says. I mean, they've gone through what they call the child study team process, and so a group of experts come in from the school district or the commission, and then they've evaluated a child, and they've provided some resources that say, here's what we found based on the battery of tests that we gave. Here's what we recommend, some of the resources or accommodations or modifications, whatever they may be, for that specific child. And then our schools sit and look at them, and with the child study team and the parents, and they say, okay, we can work with this. We can work with a lot of these recommendations. There are some times where we say you're going to be better served because you need more resources than we have available, and so you're going to be better served in a different setting. And we want to be honest with them and tell them that, because again, our goal is to make sure that we are providing for their needs overall, and we want to recognize and tell families if we can't serve those needs ultimately. So having an ISP does not mean we can't serve students in a Catholic school setting. We just need to be able to have the families come in and have conversations about what the needs of the individual kid are overall.
Thank you, Bobby.
Yeah, and that's a great indicator for people who are afraid to do this. I think that's a great question, Marianela, because I think that's the first, for some, that's the first thing. Well, I can't go there.
Right.
We're getting close to our time. So as we've been talking about reading, and as a avid lover of reading, I want to ask like a fun question to the group of, are you reading anything now? What's your sort of like favorite kind of genre or anything to read, if you are a reader? Because I think that's just kind of sort of a fun way to wrap up. So I'll let you guys have the floor. But I know you're doing a lot more on the research side, but outside of that, is there anything that you tend to enjoy?
I love murder mystery thrillers type of books. I'm a James Patterson type.
Okay.
I know that's a little cliche. But I love the cop series, the political thriller type things, fiction that I can just like get lost and turn my brain off. But I am reading a lot of books about how to teach kids to read.
I was just going to say,
So,
research fiction.
Yeah.
Keep
those
it mixed up.
Those are my books. So.
How about you, Sarah?
Well, with my little one, we're reading a lot of, fairy tales
and
ABC books and things like that.
Oh, those count. I got a lot of those.
But I do tend to gravitate towards two different things, which is either educational research or something with spirituality. And so right now I'm reading one that covers both. I just started a book. I think it's called Making Every Class Catholic, but it is about incorporating Catholic identity into all subject areas, and not just reserved for religion or theology class. So, yeah. It's exciting.
How about you, Marianela?
That's beautiful. So a while ago, Bishop Sullivan gave me a book that's called Dominicana, and it's a book about somebody that he thinks it's like me. And so he read the novel and found it really interesting and sent me a note and sent me that book. So I have it on my night table right now, and I'm kind of like making progress to reading that one. I also like to read like short stuff, like kind of like educational stuff on what I do, like enrollment stuff. So I do a lot of that, and of course a lot of old diaries with Mariana now, and typically we read the Bible at night. So that's one of my reading things.
Well, that's great. For me, I'm a history, sports, and then business, like cool inside stories of different businesses. If I go fiction, I go the spy and crime novels to turn off every once in a while. I tend to get them all and put them on a stack on my like nightstand and just go for what's there, and I think anyone that came in would not be able to peg me one bit, because they would all be there at once. There's no sort of commonality. I'm reading one on a Civil War. So I'm on my history kick right now. There's a Civil War hero that I've grown up really liking. And I'm on my way to finishing that. And then actually I think the next one is weirdly about stories. It's one that was recommended from Dr. Lee Della Monica about storytelling for our work.
Storytelling, yeah.
So I jump. It's funny, but that's what reading does for you, right?
Yeah.
And you just got the book about teaching your kids how to read.
Yes, I did. Yeah.
So
That's on the wife's nightstand because I am not the person to be doing that. But I like that stuff though. I will end up finding that on my on my book reading list because I think that stuff is fascinating. I always sort of envy you guys for being in that role to do that research because I do find that fascinating. So it was fun to talk to you guys about it today.
yeah.
For sure.
Well, we want to thank you for your time today and for the discussion around the science of reading. It's been a wonderful conversation, and you always are welcome back to the table at Talking Catholic. We want to tell our listeners that make sure you listen every week. Talking Catholic continues to educate and inspire our Catholic conversation here around the Diocese of Camden and above.
Yeah, and we promise, Marianela and I at least promise to be back sooner than whatever it was 8-9 weeks we have not been here on the podcast together, so we'll be back quickly. So thank you everybody, and we'll talk to you next week.
God bless.